narrator continues the stories. She says, "The dead are easier to believe than the living. As I took it down, my mother's tale seemed to me most likely a dream she'd had in order to make her own imminent death less frightening. But once she was gone, the story she had given me grew so convincing that I continued to record it on my own. I was the medium now, writing down in a kind of trance the fates of my grandmother Reba, my mother Sonia, and Ovid the gypsy who knew the Delter's interior as well as he knew my mother's palm, which he would read for her in secret under the sycamore in whose leafy architecture Dovlando used to hide. When a loved one disappears, and there is no body from which the answer is always the same, yes, dear ones, I am dead, the entire family falls sick. Vacillating each moment between grief and hope, kin lose their equilibrium, suffer from dizziness, stumble and fall in the midst of the simplest tasks. It is a universal illness. Relatives left behind grow impatient with each other, so exhausted is each one from the constant effort required to stay erect, to move across a room, to get to the market and back without dropping the fruit in the road or tripping over one's own feet. This goes on for a lifetime. Children fall asleep over their lessons. Parents forget the birthdays of sons and daughters who remain at home. Grandparents spend so much time in bed that coming to the kitchen for a meal seems like a journey that they will never complete. Sometimes waiting becomes one's vocation, as surely as if one were schooled in its stages, ordained to carry out its lonely tasks. It is not simply for the loved one's return that one waits. Reba waited for Dov's soul to speak to her. She waited for his ghost at the door. She even imagined him a bigamist, gone to a different wife, in Cluj maybe, who upon his death would write to Reba and tell her the truth of her husband's disappearance, how he had feigned in the Delta his madness and drowning in order to flee hundreds of miles to another woman who bore him 6 sons. Reba waited for this news too. Here in Buenos Aires, I have waited for a phone call in which my daughter might have been allowed to utter my name, for a note in her hand smuggled out by a cellmate or a comrade in hiding, for the names of others waiting like me, for the first meeting of a dozen such mothers, for the placards to be made, for the marches to begin every Thursday in the Plaza de Mayo, for the funds to open an office, for the bombing threats, for the leads that went nowhere, for someone's child's bloodied shirt, for all the graves to be discovered, for the exhumations, for dental records, for pathology reports, for the collapse of the military government, for free elections, for the trials of the generals, for the convictions, for the testimony published by the National Commission. After that day, I never saw my daughter again, is how I began my own tale of loss on the witness stand, and will tell yet again as these stories unfold. Chapter after chapter of family history, I write in your name as if I were still under oath. And so I understand exactly how Dov's unconfirmable death pitched my grandmother Reba into that vertigo from which there is no rescue. She refused to be convinced, as Ovid was, that Dov had drowned himself, accidentally or on purpose, Ovid would not say. The neatly piled clothes at the water's edge, evidence enough for him. He believed that someday fishermen would find the cobbler's body washed up on land or snared by a net in search of giant tuna, but if Dov's corpse was ever found, no one in Tulsia heard the news. Finally consenting to the funeral, Reba had placed in the empty coffin some of her husband's most cherished possessions. A blank notebook, a drawing pen, binoculars, one of the oars from his rowboat, a French dictionary, a lock of her own hair, a sketch he had made of their child Sonia days after her birth. At the gravesite, Reba prayed that Dov would send his wife a message only she could decipher, a kind of husbandly communique, private as the words he used to whisper to her at night in their bed. "I'm in the new world now, dearest," or "What a paradise," or Yesterday, Reba, I found my mother. Can you imagine that? I had never met her before. She died before I was born, but I knew her immediately. How we wept. But no such messages came. Or if they did, Reba Lando did not trust that they were truly doves. And finally, after many months of keeping herself so alert for his voice, she doubted if she'd slept more than 2 hours at a time since his disappearance, or had a single conversation with anyone into which her pain did not intrude, the room spinning around her, or the earth seeming to tilt at an angle that rendered gravity helpless. She gave up her inner vigil for him, as I will give up my own for you, grandchild, once these tales are properly recorded, once the stories have all been set down.